So, hi there, I'm Anna and I'm a Speak Out champion.
I'm Kerry. I'm also Speak Out champion in the Highlands.
Excellent. And where are you, Anna?
I'm from Glasgow as well.
Excellent. Well, my name's Councillor Holly Bruce. I am also a Speak Out champion and I'm here to answer some questions, I believe. So, yeah, fire away whenever you're ready.
Yeah. So, would you like to tell us about the work you're doing to make Glasgow Scotland's first feminist city? And what do you mean by the term feminist city?
Well, that's that question is it's taken a long time, to be honest. So I started off doing a campaign in 2021 with the Young Women's Movement, who you may be aware of, looking at how we can make our cities more inclusive for women and non-binary people. And we listened to, we received 600 responses from women and non-binary people under the age of 30. And we built a campaign around this. And what that research showed was that our streets, our parks, our public transport isn't fit for purpose. It's not safe for women. It's not accessible. It's not affordable, and it's not convenient for us. And let's be honest, it was never made for us in mind at all. Cities have traditionally been built by men and for men. So that campaign resulted in that research, and I was elected to Glasgow City Council in May 2022. And I wanted to make that a number one priority of mine. And then in October 2022, I put forward a motion to debate in full council in Glasgow, and that looked at embedding a feminist lens onto urban planning. And that was passed unanimously, which was so a surprise to me, I think, and to a few others as well. But yeah, now we're working towards embedding a feminist time planning approach into our city development plan, which will be a long-term project that is not going to be complete until 2027. It's a long process. It's a legal process, so it will take a wee bit of time. But I am kind of plugging away in the background, doing other bits and bobs in terms of like campaigns and pushing forward feminist thinking and changing the landscape of how our cities are built, and well, trying to anyway, when it comes to women and young girls as well. So that is a little whistle stop tour. If there's anything you want me to expand on, please just say.
That's all great. Thank you so much.
There are many ways to make public spaces safer for girls and young women, as we discussed in Owner Zone. But if you could just one way change something, what would it be?
It's a really good question, and I've been asked this question a lot in interviews and in events about the feminist motion. And I always like to say at the very beginning that I am one woman with one experience. I'm able-bodied, I'm white, I'm cis. So what I foresee as what a feminist city is, it might be completely different from another woman. So I think it's really important to say from the outset that we should be looking at this through an intersectional lens, and that a feminist city is built on women's experiences, and that's all women's experiences. So my answer to this question is what I foresee and from what I've heard from my constituents, but I can't answer it absolutely. But in terms of things that I'm working on, there's two things. And both of these things came out of the research that I did with Young Women Lead. One being lighting in our parks, which has proven to be quite complex. I'm a Green Party councillor, so I am very aware that we need to be mindful of biodiversity and animals within our public spaces and public parks, but providing lighting solutions that complements both them and humans. So that is a piece of work that's going through the council at the moment. There has been 3 pilot parks in Glasgow identified, and one of which sits in the boundary of my ward, Queen's Park in the south side. And there has been options given as to certain routes that could be partially lit up that would make it more convenient for people to cycle through in the winter, or just make it a more accessible space to be in the evening. I think there's an issue with, I think there's a cultural situation in Scotland where we just don't tend to go out in the evening, or we don't in the winter months because it's colder. But you see other parks in Europe that with similar climates, like in Paris and Berlin and in LA, not similar climate, but that open their parks at night, and it's for everyone. It's not a no-go zone. So that's one thing that I'm looking at. And another thing that I'm finding increasingly more people are asking me or discussing with me about is the lack of public toilets and the need for public toilets, especially around parks and in civic and public spaces. There seems to be, I do feel like it's been an afterthought for so many years, because men, boys, pee in bushes quite openly. I mean, it's illegal, but they can do it, and there's a culture of that's okay. Whereas women, families, children, disabled people can't do that as easily, or are frowned upon for doing that if they need to. So, making public toilets more accessible, or even just building a campaign around public toilets, making people aware that they can go into a local library, or they can go into a sporting venue, or having local businesses sign up to a campaign to be like, we can provide public toilets for free for people that need it. So that's the second thing that I'm really pushing forward just now.
So throughout our campaign, one of our policy calls is to invest more money in improving streetlights and building more lighting in public spaces. But this will use more electricity. So is there a way to balance out women and girls feeling safer whilst also protecting the environment? And what does this look like, or what might it involve?
It's a really good question, and I'm not an expert in that. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on electricity generation or energy consumption. I do know that in Glasgow that we are changing our street lighting to be LED, which is less impactful on the environment if it's done at a muted kind of lens. What I would say is you're right. Lighting's not going to solve our issues of public safety, of violence against women and girls. It's not. But what it does is it creates spaces. It finally creates spaces for women to be in, to start to be in, and then hopefully thrive in come the change in culture and all that needs to go with the change in infrastructure. So I think public, like lighting in parks and lighting on streets, is really important in specific areas that need it, in areas that have high traffic, in areas that are in city centres, in small shopping areas, in like mini town centres that they're calling them now. So yeah, there are areas that definitely need to be lit up for safety reasons. But I do appreciate that there are issues with energy consumption and biodiversity as well, and those things need to be looked at in detail by experts. But we shouldn't be, just to caveat that, we shouldn't be risking women's safety for the kind of betterment for that there's no solution, because there has to be.
What else can Glasgow Council do to make public spaces safer for both the local areas and to impact the wider change across Scotland?
So what can city councils do? Was that, sorry? So I mentioned a couple of those kind of campaigns that I'm leading on lighting and on public toilets. Also within the motion that was passed last October, there were actions on gender budgeting, and I see that is also gender mainstreaming and gender budgeting is part of the campaign asked, and it's really good to see. And I actually went to a training session the other day on gender budgeting and what that means in practice. So councils need to start looking at their quality outcome plans and using them when making decisions on budget. Budgets come round once every year, that there are decisions that are made ad hocly throughout the year that councillors have to make, but the big budget is usually February time. So we need to look at our quality outcome plan. We need to properly equality impact assess decisions. Right now, councils don't I don't believe councils do that adequately enough. And people like the Scottish Women's Budget Group also are of the mind that they could be done better. Right now, any policy that's assessed needs to be equality impact assessed, but usually that's a tick box exercise rather than having meaningful data used within it, rather than looking at systemic barriers, and looking at finances and things like that, that none of that is used adequately enough in my mind. So better equality impact assessments, using equality outcome plans. Another thing I mentioned, data. Like, I've turned into a massive data geek recently because I just think it's so important that you have the data to inform policy, because how are you supposed to know what people think? And that also needs to be gender disaggregated as well. A lot of the times you get surveys and there's no demographic data. How are we supposed to know what is unique to certain people and prioritize certain people, whether it be disabled people, women, people of colour, LGBT people, if we don't know what they're saying? So disaggregated data is so important. And when it comes to assessing policy, and I go back to the equality impact assessment, if that data is, say, 70% of the data that comes back is from a man, that policy isn't fit for purpose because we've only heard from 30% of women, which isn't good enough. And so I would argue that you should go back out and you should be going direct to women that you have not heard from, and going into those community groups and going into asking your councillors to go out and speak to those people to hear from them. So yeah, that would be another one. Using data is really, really important.
That's really great to hear, because Girl Guiding have just come out with their Girls' Attitude Survey, and we refer to that a lot to try and hear what our members are thinking. So it's really great to kind of see that correlation between both campaigns. But are there any other key steps we've not yet discussed that are important in making public spaces safer and more inclusive for girls?
Yeah, lots. I mean, there's urban planning is one way of changing how we navigate cities and how we interact with cities as women and young girls, and but there's the whole culture piece as well, and we are unable to do that. It goes back to education, and a lot of the time the onus is put on women and girls to do that piece, when it really goes down to education, and education of consent, education in terms of how you speak to women and girls within school settings, but also in employment settings as well. And I think that will take time. It will take time, which is so frustrating as a feminist to hear, because it is a cultural shift that's required, but it is needed urgently. But it's going to take time through policy and through governments to do that. We do need more money into violence against women and girls sector, in terms of the harsh realities that a lot of women who are domestically abused, who are assaulted, raped, who aren't given justice. That is where money is needed urgently. And it's frustrating, and I feel your pain. I think campaigns like this are amazing because they shine a light on the issues, and hopefully they will filter down to the people that need to hear them, which are men and young boys. So well done. I think it's incredibly important that this is here, and it builds on all the work that all other organisations have done for so many years, and the work that I'm doing in Glasgow as well. One thing I would say as well is the cultural shift and need for change there in education. Another thing is, another part of the motion that I proposed was on training. So it was to have gender budgeting training for all heads of service within the council. And most of our heads of service are men, and they are not gender sensitively trained, to my knowledge. So I think having training, and for people, it's not just at school level or educational level, it's within the workplace as well. It's it needs to be done across the board. So training within employment settings, within organisational charity settings as well is really important.
Thank you for that. And finally, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we finish?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've learned, and I'm still learning about how we can make public spaces more safe for women and young girls. But one thing I have learned along the way through research and through speaking to different people, geographers, academics, journalists, is that often in communities, people are really quick to say what is wrong rather than what is strong or what is an ambition or a vision. So I always like to go from a place of positive and hope and a vision of what you want to see, what I want to see. I think people often, and I think it's absolutely fair to call out when there's bad behaviour, when things aren't good enough, but it's also really important to have that strong vision of what we want to see, because we can point out what's wrong, but if we don't have a vision of what we want, then we won't see change. So I would say that stuck with me. Start from what is strong, not as wrong. And yeah, hopefully that will change things. I don't know.
Thank you so much for your time. We've been so inspired by your campaigns throughout our whole planning for Own Our Zone. We're really excited to kind of see that change and even have experienced the changes you've made within your constituency. It's been great to see, and we really appreciate the work you've been doing as well.
That's really nice of you to say. Thank you.